Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike Dobbs. I'm managing editor for Reminder Publications, and it's my pleasure and privilege this evening to be moderating once again a discussion on the issues here on Focus Springfield. We're going to be speaking to two men who are running for the state Senate, and they are the incumbent State Senator Eric Lesser and James Chip Harrington, who is a member of the school committee in Ludlow. This evening, we're joined by two members of the press, Shannon Young, who is the political reporter for the Republican, and Matt Szafranski from Western Massachusetts Politics and Insight. This debate is going to be a little bit different than some of the other debates that we've had here on Focus Springfield. We're going to have a segment to open up the hour in which our media panel here will be asking questions of the two candidates. Then after that, there's going to be an opportunity for them to do what's known as a Lincoln-Douglas debate, that is, ask each other questions directly. So first of all, let's just give an opening statement from each candidate, and we're going to start with Mr. Harrington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dobbs, and thank you to Focus Springfield for putting this forum together, and to Matt and Shannon for agreeing to be a part of it. My name is Chip Harrington, and I'm running for state Senate because I've lived here for the last 48 years, and I have watched the quality of life in our entire region deteriorate. I am a small business owner, a part-time police officer, and a school committee member. I can tell you that in the last 10 years, I'm working twice as hard and making less money. And I know there are a lot of you out there that are dealing with the same exact thing. I feel very passionately about this district. I've been involved for 25 years on a municipal level as a school committee member, former selectman, and I have founded countless organizations. I feel that my experience far outweighs my opponent when I go to Beacon Hill to represent you and fight for your needs here in Western Massachusetts, because I have the experience to bring up there and bring home as the funding that's required here in the district. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Senator Lesser.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Shannon and Matt, for moderating tonight's panel. Thank you to the great team at Focus Springfield, and thank you, Chip, for your public service and for joining us today. My name is Eric Lesser, and I've been your state senator for the past 2 years, and together we've gotten a lot done. We've been working hard on those big initiatives we need to take on to make sure that, as Chip mentioned, we improve quality of life and improve opportunity for all of our families here in Western Massachusetts. Here's just some of the things we've already worked on. For the first time in a long time, we've made real progress on high-speed east-west rail. We've taken on the substance abuse crisis, and through innovative thinking, we've lowered the cost of Narcan for our police, firefighters, and first responders. We've provided funding for new job training programs for our returning veterans and our students. We're investing in a culture and arts economy here in Springfield, a new innovation district, a new cultural district, a new restaurant district, made possible through partnerships between the private sector, the public sector, the city, and the state. And we have a lot more we want to do, whether it's expanding early education, bringing in more help for small businesses, more investment in our manufacturing, and closing the skills gap. We've gotten a lot done, but there's certainly a lot more to do, and we're just getting started, which is why I hope over the course of tonight and over the next few weeks, I'll be able to earn your trust and your support for a second term. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Senator. I'm going to lead off with the first question, and it's, of course, directed at both gentlemen. We have a ballot question that, if passed by the voters of the Commonwealth, would legalize recreational use of marijuana. One of you is going to be going to the State House in January and a new session, and if this particular ballot question passes, there's undoubtedly going to be a lot of concern about how this is actually going to work in the Commonwealth. Whether or not there's going to have to be additional legislation to deal with the social issues, the criminal issues, et cetera, that goes into something like this. So let me just ask, I'll give Mr. Harrington the first crack at this answer. If you're elected, how are you going to react to legal marijuana in this state?
Well, first, I can tell you, I'm opposed to the ballot question. I'm going to be voting no on legalizing marijuana. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm a part-time police officer. And one of the things that is most difficult about this issue right now is there's no mechanism for our law enforcement agencies or anybody in the public service to determine whether or not somebody is maybe driving impaired or acting impaired through the use of marijuana. To states, Colorado and Washington State, have already legalized it. So they're kind of an incubator for us to kind of watch and see what happens. I know that traffic accidents are up in each of those states. Until there's some mechanism in place, I don't think it's smart legislation at this point. I understand the arguments that people say where, right now there's illegal marijuana on the street, you don't know what's in it and what it's laced with, and this is a stronger way of keeping it more regulated. But even in those 2 other states where they've legalized it, there are still issues with the black market on the street with legalized marijuana. So if I'm elected to the state senate and it becomes law through the ballot question that does take place, I am going to put my experience to work as a police officer and in law enforcement to make sure that there's some type of mechanism in place that our law enforcement agencies can use to regulate it. And furthermore, I also think it sends a very mixed message to our youth. Here we are, we're going to be talking, I'm sure, at some point about opiates and the heroin problem we have. The marijuana ballot question flies into the face of that. We're telling our young people right now, don't do opiates, don't do hard drugs, don't do heavy narcotics, but we'll make marijuana legal, and that's a mixed message, I think, to our young people. I don't think it's smart that we do that for our young people in this district or throughout the state. But here in the Pioneer Valley, I think it really has a gripping effect when we talk about the opiates and the heroin. And anybody that I've ever talked to in my years as a corrections officer, a court services coordinator, or as a police officer, they all tell me one thing, that marijuana is one of their first things that they tried. It was almost their introductory to this gateway drug. So I'm a no vote on that.
Okay, Senator?
Well, thank you so much, Mike. It's obviously a very important question, gotten a lot of attention. Chip and I actually agree on the ballot question. I personally will be voting no on the question as well for similar reasons. We're in the midst of an unprecedented public health crisis with the substance abuse epidemic, and I support medical marijuana and want to see that continue to work its way through. I support decriminalization efforts of marijuana. There's significant disparities in how marijuana cases are tried in our criminal justice system that need to continue to be addressed, but we need to be thoughtful about the approach, especially when we're in the midst, again, of this unprecedented substance abuse crisis. I agree with our Attorney General and our Governor in that analysis. That being said, it's not up to us. It's up to the voters. It'll be decided in a referendum in a few weeks, and I intend to fully participate in making sure that that law is implemented effectively if the referendum does pass. So what do we have to think through with that? Well, there's several elements. We can look to Colorado as an example of how to make the adjustment. There are issues around possession requirements that'll have to be sorted out, DUI elements and how that will be trafficked. Regulation of edibles is another important element that's had some issues in Colorado. There's also work that's going to need to be done with the federal government, with the banking and financial system, because of course marijuana is still illegal on a federal level, so that will have to be sorted out. So there's a lot to think through to make this effective and to make the transition successful. But you do have a promise from me that if the voters decide to go this route, we will absolutely, and I will absolutely respect that, and we will work as earnestly and prudently and expeditiously as possible to make sure the referendum is implemented in a successful and fair way.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is from Shannon Young.
Hi. So I'm going to let you guys sort of dig down a little bit more into this issue. Looking at the ballot issue on marijuana legalization, if that goes through, how would you two both address the growing opioid crisis in the state? What does the state need to do, in your opinions, and what is reasonable? There's a lot of people out here who can't get into treatment facilities, and so I'm just sort of looking at what would each of you sort of bring to the State House in terms of addressing the opioid crisis? And
we'll have Senator Lesser answer that first.
Well, thank you, Shannon, for that. It's an incredibly important issue. It's an issue I know all too well, both personally and in our own communities, the impact substance abuse is having. I've met personally with dozens of both the people in recovery and parents of those in recovery, whether it's the Ludlow Cares Coalition or the SOAR Coalition in Belchertown, met with hundreds, dozens and dozens, even hundreds of providers, police officers on the front lines of this issue was just at Bay State Medical Center's emergency room announcing new funding we secured for recovery coaches. We need to do a few things. One thing I've already done is secured legislation signed by the governor to bring the price of Narcan down. That law has successfully brought the price of Narcan from $66 a dose to $22 a dose. This is a life or death issue. If a first responder shows up at an overdose scene and has Narcan in the car, that person has a 97% chance of living. If they show up and don't have Narcan in the car, unfortunately, there's a high likelihood that the incident will not end well. So what do we have to do going forward? We need to continue to beef up treatment, especially treatment access in Western Massachusetts. Nearly every day, I hear from constituents who just at the moment when they're brave enough to make that decision to get help, they're pulled out of their support structure here in Western Mass and sent to Eastern Mass to get treatment. We need more treatment beds here. We need to reorient our criminal justice system away from lock them up and throw away the key and towards prevention and treatment. We need to continue to focus on more prevention as well. That includes screenings in our schools, more education at lower ages, and we need to bring the provider community, the medical community on board as well, because 75% of the heroin deaths we're seeing in Western Massachusetts begin with legal prescription drugs. So we have to get a handle on the prescription drugs.
Mr. Harrington.
You know, this issue is a bit of shows an example of the difference between myself and my opponent. I'm that first responder that shows up at the scene when somebody has overdosed. I'm the one doing CPR. I have sat in the kitchen consoling a mother as her son is being worked on by paramedics in the basement. It is very, very real to me. 2 years ago, when I ran for this exact same seat, I was the first candidate and the first time we ever gave a speech to tell people in the room that there's something going on in our streets. And it's being triggered by opiates and heroin. So I know firsthand. I don't have to talk to everyone. Even I talk to as many people as I possibly can. But I see on a regular basis the real effects of this this epidemic we're dealing with. You know, one thing that I've noticed over this campaign, as I've gotten into it this year, is that there's a disconnect between our private providers and our state government. There are providers out there that are looking to get into becoming intensive care treatment programs. But government is in the way. The bureaucracy that exists is in the way. I spoke to an agency in the local area that wants to become an intensive provider, but there's a 196-page document that they need to follow in order to become this provider. So as one hand, the government is saying, we need more people, we need more agencies, we need more beds to step up. But at the same time, the bureaucracy of our government gets in the way to do it. And as your state senator, I'm going to break those barriers down. I'm going to streamline the process so that we can get more agencies with qualified people, qualified counselors into the field so that people can take proper precautions to get treatment. And as Eric said, you know, there's not enough beds. People need treatment when they leave the bed and need intensive treatment. And it needs to be here in the neighborhood. We can't be sending people to the eastern part of the state for programs. It needs to be done here. I know firsthand the effects of this issue because it affects me on a regular basis when I put my badge on.
Thank you, sir. Matt, you have the next question.
In the national campaign, of course, there have been a lot of issues going on, but we sometimes beat around the bush a little bit on the underlying point of it, particularly women's issues. So I would like to hear from both of you. What are your positions on some of the more prominent women's issues, things such as abortion, access to health care, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which was considered this past session, and beyond those issues mentioned, what would you look to pass in the next session that would be addressing women's issues?
And we're going to direct that at first to Mr. Harrington.
Thank you very much, Matt. Great question. I've got an 18-year-old daughter that just recently started school at Worcester State, and I've got a beautiful wife as well, too. There's nothing more important, I think, to anybody, and I'm sure Eric is not going to disagree with this. Women's issues matter, and they matter significantly. And what we're seeing on the national stage, quite frankly, is disgusting from our candidates. I'm a pro-choice candidate. I want a woman to have the right to choose. I know it's a very emotional issue. It's a very charged issue. I understand that. But as somebody who is the father of an 18-year-old girl and you know, numerous women in my family, I want them to have the choice to do with their body if they're ever caught in a situation like that. Women's issues expand far beyond just the pro-choice issue, but they should be treated fairly in the workplace. There should be these glass ceilings that once existed for women need to be shattered. If they still exist, they need to be shattered. Equal pay, equal work for equal women and men alike, I should say. So I would certainly, if there's any legislation that's going to come forward in front of the Massachusetts State House and the Senate, I'm going to take into account everybody in my family, because that's who I'm representing. I'm going to Boston to represent you here in this district. And when it comes to women's issues, there's really nothing more important for a woman who's trying to break that glass ceiling and get a fair wage in the workplace. And I think that's where we stand right now. There are still problems for women achieving equal pay. That's where government steps in to help women achieve those gaps.
Thank you, sir. Senator?
Well, thank you, Matt, for that question. It is a vitally important issue, and unfortunately, the presidential campaign has highlighted just how important it is. Let me tell you a little bit about what I've worked on in the state Senate on this issue. I was the co-sponsor of the Pay Equity Act, which requires basically, or is the most aggressive law in the country to move towards pay equity. Basically, still in this country, women are paid less for doing the same work that men do. That is fundamentally wrong. And we in the legislature, in the Senate, took the lead on putting a proposal together, the most aggressive in the country, to turn back that, worked in a bipartisan way, secured the signature of the governor, had Republican and Democratic co-sponsors that we worked on to put that together. I was also the co-sponsor in the Senate of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Today, in the 21st century, in the United States of America, it's still permissible for employers to not provide reasonable accommodations to pregnant women. This first came to my attention when a woman approached me who told me the story of working at a job site in her third trimester. She was denied the ability to sit on a stool while she worked at a cash register in her third trimester of pregnancy. We worked to pass that legislation in the Senate. Unfortunately, it didn't make it through the House, but I'm going to continue to fight for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act in the next term. Another issue I'm going to work on very hard that I was also a co-sponsor of this year is paid family leave. We need a robust and strong paid family leave law in this state, and we need comprehensive sick time insurance for workers. This disproportionately impacts women who have to take time off to care for a loved one, a child, or a parent. We need to do this not just for women. This isn't just a women's issue. These are human issues. These are issues that men and women face, and it's part of living in a modern society, ensuring that everybody in our community has access to the same opportunities.
Thank you, sir. Okay, with our next question will be Shannon.
So both of you have faced claims of opportunism or being opportunist. For Mr. Harrington, it's been claimed that you've been an opportunist by switching from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party in this campaign. And for Mr. Lesser, you've been charged with being a career opportunist and focusing on a bigger job, on a bigger stage by campaigning for Hillary Clinton and keeping friends in high places from your time on the Obama campaign. So to each of you, I ask, how do you respond to these claims of being an opportunist, and what would you like the voters to know in regards to that?
And going first would be Senator Lesser.
Well, thanks, Shannon. I'd like the voters to look at what we've been up to the last 20 months. When I ran for office 2 years ago, I came to you and I said, let's work together on some big issues. Let's work on better including Western Massachusetts in the growth and the opportunity we see all around us. And I pulled my sleeves up, and together, that's what we've worked on. We haven't achieved everything, but we have made some real concrete progress. For the first time in a very long time, we have made real progress on East-West Rail and on looking at and opening that possibility for our future and for our families. We've created new job training programs in advanced manufacturing. Lower Pioneer Valley Education Collaborative now has a brand new vocational training program in advanced machining, thanks to work we did in the Senate to get that funding secured. We've gotten more support for Bright Nights, for the 4th of July fireworks, for the pancake breakfast through my work as chair of the Senate Committee on Tourism, arts, and cultural development. I led the fight for the preschool expansion grants. When the state was facing cuts to kindergarten expansion in the state, the superintendent of the Springfield schools and the mayor called me, asked me to work to deliver those funds for the kindergarten kids in Springfield. We've made real efforts on a new cultural district in Springfield, a new innovation district, and we've made real progress, although it's still not enough, on the substance abuse crisis, lowering the price of Narcan by 2/3, from $66 to $22. So do we have ambitions? Of course we have ambitions. There's a lot to do here in Western Mass, and there's a lot we need to get done in a fairly short amount of time. We've been left out and left behind from the growth and the opportunity in other parts of the state, frankly, for too long. So there's a lot to do, there's a lot to get done, and I would say for the voters to look at my record and make their own decisions.
Okay, so we're going to ask the second part of that question to Mr. Harrington.
Thank you. We will revisit this because I don't think Mr. Lesser answered the question. I was a Democrat. I was born Irish Catholic, and when you're born Irish Catholic in 1968, you're a Democrat. And I ran 2 years ago as a Democrat, and I admittedly got into the race as a very moderate Democrat. I'm a fiscal conservative, I'm a small business owner, I'm a part-time police officer. So I got into that race, and very soon after getting into the race, realized that the Massachusetts Democratic Party had moved much further left than where I was comfortable being. So after that race was over, I quickly left the party. And to coin a phrase from an old politician, I didn't leave the party left me, and that's how I felt. And I became an independent. But then I got to know Governor Baker, and I respect Governor Baker tremendously. In fact, he's endorsed my campaign. He and Lieutenant Governor Polito are helping me out with my campaign. And I became a Republican at that point because I think Governor Baker is the kind of Republican that I embody. Fiscally conservative, socially somewhat liberal. And I think many people in this district feel that exact same way. So I can be referred to as an opportunistic person for changing from a Democrat to a Republican. But let me remind you, two of the leaders of the Democratic Party, Elizabeth Warren was once a Republican, I think until she was at the age of 44, and she became a Democrat. And Hillary Clinton herself was a Republican back when she was in college. So people mature, people change, and people do change their parties. In this business, when you want to be a candidate, when you want to run, being an independent isn't really an option, quite frankly. You've got to pick a team to be on. But I'm happy to be on the team with Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito because they're doing a great job for this Commonwealth on a fiscal matter. And that's the kind of people that I want to work with. So if somebody out there is thinking that I just switched from a D to an R just to run for the seat and they don't vote for me, so be it. I can't change their mind. But that's the truth. And you look at the campaign from 2 years ago, and you'll see that I'm not saying anything different now than I did then. My values are the same, my views are the same, and I feel strongly about that.
Thanks very much, sir. Okay, we're going to have one final question to the candidates in this segment, and that's going to be from Matt Szafranski.
Thank you. Drawing a little bit off of the previous question, campaign finance has been a bone of contention, but during this race. Senator Lesser, you have been criticized for receiving a substantial amount of out-of-state campaign finance funds, all disclosed, but nevertheless out of state. Mr. Harrington, you have said that you feel very strongly about outside money influencing a candidate. However, the Mass GOP, which funds the paid staffing on working on your campaign and the office, has received the same proportion of out-of-state funding as Senator Lesser's campaign. What business is it of out-of-state donors to be involved in this election?
And we're going to go to Senator Lesser to answer that question first.
Well, thank you, Matt, so much. I'll let Chip answer the question about the Massachusetts Republican Party. As for me, I've been very upfront about my story. I grew up here in Western Massachusetts, went to public schools here. After working hard and listening to what my parents told me to do, which was study hard, I was able to attend Harvard University for my bachelor's degree and Harvard Law School for my law degree. I also worked on the presidential campaign of Barack Obama back in 2007 when nobody really gave him a shot. And I worked for him at the White House as well. I worked for him a total of 4 years through some very interesting, to say the least, and historic moments in our history. And during that time, you meet a lot of people from a lot of different places. And we've generated a lot of excitement both in my campaign in 2014 and in the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years. And people from all over have been excited about supporting that. People I've worked with, people I've gone to school with, and people I've helped and worked with and advocated for here in our district, here in Western Massachusetts. And what has that meant? It's meant that we've been able to generate excitement over a whole lot of really important issues for Western Massachusetts, like high-speed rail between Springfield and Boston, like more high-tech jobs in Western Massachusetts, like, for example, better manufacturing and voc ed training to close the skills gap. There's a lot more that we want to do. There's a lot more that we're going to continue to do. And I'm proud of the support I've received from folks from every corner of my life and every stage of my journey who have been excited and motivated by our message.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Harrington.
Getting to the second part of your question first, as far as the Mass GOP funding an office in Springfield, from which myself, Senator Humison, Representative Boldiga, sheriff candidates all work out of, that's a much different comparison than Senator Lesser's campaign. Please go take a look at the Office of Political Campaign Finance, look at their report, and take a look at Senator Lesser's campaign donations and where they're coming from. There's a big difference between myself and Senator Lesser when it comes to this. Number one, there's a tremendous amount of money that's coming from outside the state and outside the district into his campaign. He is getting on a plane and he flies to he flies to San Francisco, flies to Washington, D.C., and he's having fundraisers down there. You can say, oh, I've got friends all over the country. I've got friends all over the country as well, too. I'm not asking them for any money. Because you know what? When you look at a campaign, and there's no secret about this, when you look at a campaign and who is funding a campaign, that's who wants that person's ear in some way. So when both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are talking about this rigged system, Eric Lesser is a part of that rigged system. He was selected from the National Democratic Committee to come up here, and they gave him close to $600,000 from 2 years ago and bought this seat that he's representing to you in right now. All of my donors are in this district. I maybe have a few people from the Worcester area that are my aunt and uncles that are writing me a check. But that's it. Everyone else is coming from inside this district because you're the one I want to represent. If you write me a check for my campaign, that's who you're looking to represent, somebody that is your neighbor, and that's who I am. I'm not looking for anything further down the road. I don't want to be your congressman. I don't want to be your U.S. senator or governor. I just want to be your state senator. And it would be ludicrous for me to ask for people from all over the country to fund my campaign. Even if I could do it, it's not morally right. And it tells you who is behind Senator Lesser.
Thanks very much, sir. Okay, so this closes the part of the debate where the panel asks questions. Now we're going to go to a Lincoln Douglas format. As I said before, the purpose of this is actually to create sort of a conversation between these two candidates about their own positions and about them questioning each other's positions. So we're going to open this up. And the way it's going to work is that one candidate's going to ask a question, the other candidate's going to come up with an answer, there would be a time for a rebuttal, and then we'll go to the other candidate to ask a question. And hopefully I don't have to cut off any microphones or snap a whip or blow a whistle. I think they're going to behave themselves. So I'm going to start this off with Mr. Harrington. Mr. Harrington, you can ask the senator a question.
If Congressman Neal leaves office next week, are you running for Congress?
Well, no. That's a very hypothetical question, Chip, so I'm not going to answer a hypothetical question. But I am happy to talk about Congressman Neal, who I worked for when I was in high school. One of my first jobs was working for Congressman Neal, and he's an enthusiastic supporter of my reelection, and I'm an enthusiastic supporter of him in Congress. And one of the things I learned from Congressman Neal is that we're judged by what we do and what we deliver for our communities. He's worked on Union Station, for example. One of the ways that we're going to make sure Union Station is successful is by having both north-south rail service and east-west rail service, which is one of the reasons I've worked so hard on making that a reality. Another thing that Congressman Neal has championed through much of his career is the substance abuse crisis. In fact, he hosted the Attorney General in Washington to talk about this issue last year. We need partnership between the federal government and the local and state government on substance abuse. That's one of the reasons I've been so focused on this issue. One of the reasons we work so hard on the Narcan bulk purchasing program. So I appreciate the enthusiasm, but not going to engage in hypotheticals. I'm here running for re-election to the state Senate, and I've really enjoyed the job. Part of the reason why I've enjoyed the job is because, again, we've been able to work on a lot of really important issues, issues in the community I grew up in, issues that are vital to the future of my 3-year-old daughter, things like more high-tech jobs, better integrating our economy here in Western Massachusetts with the economies all around us, expanding early education, championing the preschool expansion grants, and so many other issues. So that's what we're going to continue to do. I'm going to continue to do the job as long as I feel like we're effective and we're making things happen.
Would you care for a rebuttal?
Thank you very much. I would love to have a rebuttal. Well, your OCPF reports tells a different story. Senator Lesser has a company out of DC called 4C Partners that he pays about $3,500 a month to. And what that organization does on their own website, they'll even tell you that they're very heavily involved in congressional candidates. And I think it's disingenuous. And I think it's a very fair question for me to reach out to Eric and say, are you going to run for Congress? And I think you, as the voter, deserve to know where what his ambitions are. It's wonderful. We all have ambitions. It's wonderful that he may be looking to do that. But at the same time, he needs to be truthful and tell you, where this thing may lead to. When you're hiring a company from Washington, D.C. to do your consulting for $3,500 a month, it only leads to one thing, that there's a bigger plan beyond this thing. And it's, as Shannon asked the question earlier about being opportunistic, I think we need to be fair and be honest with the taxpayers as to what this candidate is truly looking to do. And like I said, getting back to what we talked about earlier, 70% of his donations for this seat are coming from outside the district. Before Eric Lesser even took office last time, he had a fundraiser at a lobbyist's office. David Axelrod, one of the most popular Democratic behind-the-scene people in the country, is helping his campaign. So I'm the little guy here. I am, without a doubt, the underdog, and I'm happy to be that underdog because I think everybody out there can relate to the underdog. All my donations are small, all my donations are local, but all my donations are real, from real people that I know. I can look at my report and I can point to somebody and say, yeah, I know that person. I went to school with them. I taught their kids football. I coached their kids in something else and helped them in the town of Ludlow. So I think it's just disingenuous, and I think it's a fair question to ask Eric Lesser.
Okay, Senator, you get a chance to ask Mr. Harrington a question.
Well, while we're on the topic of campaign offices, I appreciate and I applaud you, Chip, for standing for denouncing Donald Trump's recent comments in a Facebook post yesterday. But the most prominent Republicans in Massachusetts, including Charlie Baker, Bill Weld, Mitt Romney, and Brian Lees, our local longtime state senator, denounced Trump months ago. At the same time that they were denouncing Donald Trump, you were sharing office space with him and continue to share office space with him. You also were the featured speaker at a campaign debate watch party for Donald Trump, and you share volunteers with Donald Trump, and you share data with Donald Trump. So my question is are you prepared to completely separate yourself from Donald Trump and his campaign and the arguments he's been standing for in this campaign by moving out of his office and separating yourself from his data operation and stopping the continued use of his resources?
I don't know if they're his resources. They're national GOP funds, so I don't know if they're Donald Trump's resources. I've never met Donald Trump. I don't plan to meet Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump's a disgusting person. I'm not voting for Donald Trump. When it comes to election day, I'm writing Charlie Baker's name in for president because I also think equally Hillary Clinton, I'm not a fan of Hillary Clinton's as well. So if we're going to compare ourselves, if you're going to say that I'm somehow connected to Donald Trump in some way, who a man I've never met, I guess I can look to you and say, you must also have a connection to Hillary Clinton because I'm assuming you've met her, and maybe you know her. At one point, you referred to yourself as the president or the chairman of her Massachusetts campaign in some document I saw. So should I hold you accountable for her emails or for what happens in Benghazi? Because you're trying to associate me with Donald Trump, a person I've never met, a person I'm not voting for, just because of office space. We utilize that office. My volunteers are Chip Harrington volunteers. There are paid people from the state GOP that are in there. What they're doing with their time for Donald Trump, I couldn't even tell you that. But I can tell you what my volunteers are doing. they're Chip Harrington people. We're knocking on doors, we're sending out the mailers, we're doing everything that your campaign is doing as well, too. So to try to tie me to somebody that I've never met because he says vile things and I don't really agree with his principles, it would be the same as me saying to you, well, you know Hillary, so therefore you should be associated with her missing emails, and you should be associated with her stance in Benghazi and having Americans killed. I don't think that's fair. I wouldn't do that to you, and I don't think people out there are going to buy it, but you took the shot.
Time for a rejoinder.
Sure. So first of all, Hillary's by no means perfect, but I don't think that we can compare the video that we saw this week and some of the things that were said by Donald Trump, not just this past week, but for the last several months, attacking a federal judge because they're Mexican, insulting an entire religion of over 1 billion people and banning them from entering the United States, vilifying and trashing the good name of a Hispanic beauty pageant contestant that fell on the other side of a political opinion of his. I don't think that they're the same. And unequivocally, I'll say it proudly, yes, I'm voting for and I support Hillary Clinton for president, and I have for a long time and will continue to. Do I think she's perfect? Of course not. But I am supporting her for president, and I think she'll make a very good president. But that's not the point. The point is that this is a broader question of judgment and what we stand for and where we're going to draw a line in the sand on certain given issues. You're sharing office space with Donald Trump. You're sharing data with Donald Trump. You're sharing volunteers with Donald Trump. You spoke at Donald Trump's debate watch party. I'm not saying that you've met him or that you guys are best friends. All I'm saying is that when you make a decision to associate and intertwine yourself so much with someone that every single, even moderate Republican in the state has distanced themselves from, including months ago, our Governor Charlie Baker, months and months ago, our former governor, Bill Weld, who's actually running as a libertarian on the other side, and our local former state senator, Republican